Hey everybody, it's Steve and welcome to day 7 of the 12 Days of Soul Care Storytelling Edition. And I'd like to ask you to shift gears with me from a 12 days of Christmas kind of an idea to sort of a New Year's reflection, looking back, looking ahead, looking around, looking within, because that's what our North American holiday calendar asks us to do. If you have a spiritual set of moorings and Christmas is a sacred holiday to you, there's a lot of reflection that you can do around that time of the year. But very quickly, within a few days, we shift gear to New Year's Day, the next holiday just a week later. And it is really a time for some reflection. And that's why I think storytelling is a great motif for soul care. Now, in storytelling, clearly we have a hero. We've talked about the hero's background and setting, their pain and their problems and aspirations. But I also want to ask you to think about the author of the story. Any story you've read, any story that you see depicted in a movie, had an author. Somebody wrote the novel, somebody wrote the screenplay, and set the characters in settings and set them in situations, and a story evolves or emerges for you and I to enjoy. I really think that God in heaven does some of that with us. I think that He is the author who sets us in a lot of contexts and settings we had nothing to do with. We were born into a family somewhere. We were raised by certain people. We were given a certain upbringing. And we didn't have a whole lot to say about it. It was just the cards we were dealt. Some are privileged. Some are very difficult. Some are privileged and difficult. But whatever the case, I believe that God had His eye on you and you on His mind from the get-go, but He's not going to leave you alone in your story. I really think that He wants to co-author your story with you. I'm thinking about a movie that came out just before the pandemic, Knives Out, and a sequel is out now, a sequel of sorts, A Glass Onion. But in this story, you have Harlan Thrombey, this author of murder mysteries, and he himself commits suicide or is murdered or something, and his family is really quirky. They have a lot of contentious spirit between them all, and we have the hero of the story, and her name is Marta, and she was his nurse, and she knows something that no one else knows. No one else knows she knows, but she doesn't know everything. And that's like you and me in our story. We know things that no one else knows about our story, but we don't know everything. We don't know all the things that went on behind the scenes at various junctures of our life. We certainly don't know what God had in mind when He placed us in certain situations. So I'd like to think about how author Stephen King approaches writing a mystery, writing a story. And he says this: I want to put a group of characters in some sort of a predicament and then watch them try to work themselves free. My job isn't to help them work their way free or manipulate them to safety, but to watch what happens and then write it down. It's a really interesting approach, which other authors have discussed, that they themselves don't know how the story is going to end. Stephen King says he has an idea, but his characters often become much more resourceful than he knew they would be. And they work themselves free, or something happens that he didn't anticipate. Well, I think that God creates interesting characters, puts us in predicaments, and then watches to see how resourceful we might be, how we might operate to work ourselves free. And unlike Stephen King, I don't think he just kind of sits back and lets them do their own thing. And I really believe that he wants to co-author our story with us. And He won't overstep His bounds. He gives us a tremendous amount of freedom, and yet He is involved, and yet some things are foreordained, and there's a lot of mystery there I can't explain, but He wants to co-author your story with you. And I'm just wondering what that makes you think. Does that resonate with you? Where does He start and end? Where do you pick up, and how do you sort of do that together? That's just a really interesting question I'd like to ask you to think about. And even as you look back on this past year, what has unfolded? What did He place in front of you? What obstacles, what opportunities, what people, what predicaments? And what have you done? What have you done to work yourself free? Or did you take a difficult situation and make a bad situation worse? How do you reflect on your story all and over the past year? I'd like to know. Feel free to leave me a comment here or write me a note at coaching@getyourbusinessdone.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts about your story and co-authoring it with God. You're an interesting character, and I'd love to hear how you're working yourself free. Take care now, and bye-bye.